New terror attacks in Belgium marred this Holy Week. The United States formally declares that ISIS is engaged in a genocide in the Middle East. And President Obama makes an historic visit to Cuba. Here to discuss it all is a senior member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Chris Smith, and terrorism expert, Dr. WALID PHARES. And finally, Fox News contributor Mercedes SCHLAPP will analyze this week's presidential primaries. The World Over Live begins right now.
Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A happy Holy Week and Easter to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. Congressman Chris Smith, Dr. WALID PHARES, Mercedes SCHLAPP, and more, all straight ahead. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show, or if you have a question, I'll be live tweeting throughout. You can find me on Twitter at Raymond Arroyo, or you can email me at worldover@EWTN.com. Let's get started. Here's the brief news from the world over this week. Another high-profile ISIS attack has hit Europe. A multinational investigation and manhunt continues for the terror suspects and cells believed responsible for the Brussels bombings. At the latest count, 34 people are dead and more than 200 wounded after two bomb blasts rocked the Brussels airport, with another hitting a metro station during morning rush hour on Tuesday. The two suicide bombers killed in the airport attack have been identified as brothers Khaled and Brahim El Bakroi. The attacks came 4 days after Belgian and French police arrested the suspected mastermind of last November's Paris terror attacks. ISIS has claimed responsibility for this week's attack and warns of more to come. Pope Francis on Wednesday called for the unanimous condemnation of the terrorist attacks on Brussels, urging prayers to convert hearts, quote, blinded by cruel fundamentalism. At the end of his weekly audience, the Pope led thousands gathered in St. Peter's Square in silent prayer for the victims of the deadly attacks. And this past week, Secretary of State John Kerry declared that the Islamic State atrocities carried out against Christians and other religious minorities are genocidal. This marks the first such U.S. declaration of genocide since 2004. In a March 17th statement, Kerry had this to say.
Daesh is responsible for genocide against groups in areas under its control, including Yazidis, Christians, and Shia Muslims. We must hold the perpetrators accountable, and we must find the resources to help those harmed by these atrocities be able to survive on their ancestral land.
Kerry added that military action to defeat ISIS is important, and that a coalition against ISIS was working to target the terror group's finances and ensure that refugees would someday be able to return to their homes. More on all of this in our next segment with Chris Smith and WALID PHARES. And two split decisions in this week's Western presidential primaries. On the Republican side, Donald Trump's call for a wall along the southern border helped him to a big win in Arizona. Trump outpaced Ted Cruz 47 to 25%. Cruz turned the tables in Utah, dominating the state with nearly 70% of the vote there. Trump came in a distant third. On the Democratic side, Bernie Sanders dominated the caucuses of Utah and Idaho with upwards of 80% of the vote in both states. Hillary Clinton took Arizona 58 to 40%. And President Barack Obama completed his historic visit to Cuba on Tuesday, urging Cubans to look to a hopeful future with the United States. In a speech peppered with Spanish and nationally televised from Havana's Grand Theater, Obama declared that his packed three-day visit with Raul Castro and the Cuban people marks the burying of the last remnant of the Cold War in the Americas. In an apparent reference to President Ronald Reagan's confrontational Cold War speech in Berlin, Obama said he's calling for something different.
Many suggested that I come here and ask the people of Cuba to tear something down. But I'm appealing to the young people of Cuba who will lift something up, build something new. El futuro de Cuba tiene que estar en las manos del pueblo cubano.
Despite the enthusiasm in both the U.S. and Cuba for this new relationship, Obama acknowledged the differences that have persisted on human rights and democracy. With the island nation's communist leader Raul Castro looking on, he called for Cubans to be able to, quote, speak their minds without fear and pick their leaders in free and fair elections. And the Supreme Court on Wednesday heard arguments in the Little Sisters of the Poor case against the Obama administration's contraceptive mandate. According to the law created under Obamacare, many religious organizations must facilitate providing its employees free contraceptives through a government-run scheme, including abortifacients and sterilizations. Sister Dorothy Seymour explains.
They're asking us to provide services through our insurance that violate our religious beliefs. And we're asking if we could be exempt too to practice our religious beliefs and caring for the elderly. And if we don't follow their requirements, we'll have to pay $70 million per year.
The Obama administration is arguing that it has a compelling national interest in providing such contraceptive access. The court's holding could reaffirm America's historic commitment to religious liberty or restrict its free exercise for decades to come. And prefect of the papal household, Archbishop Georg Gonswein, predicts that Pope Francis will cleave to church teaching regarding communion for divorced and remarried Catholics in his yet-to-be-released exhortation on the Synod. In a German-language interview, Archbishop Gonswein confirmed that Francis will address the pastoral care of divorced and remarried Catholics, but he is confident that the Pope will, quote, continue on the path of his predecessors. Though that much anticipated document has been signed by the Pope, it will not be released until mid-April, according to a Vatican spokesman. Whenever it comes, the papal posse, Father Gerald Murray and Robert Royal and myself will give you a full analysis. And finally, Pope Francis expanded his presence on social media this week. Francis made his debut on the popular photo-sharing site Instagram, and he was an instant hit. The Holy Father's first post was an image of himself in prayer. At the official launch ceremony at the Vatican, the Pope was welcomed by Instagram CEO Kevin Systrom, who said that his site will enable the pontiff to reach 400 million people who use the service. The Vatican Secretariat for Communications will manage the account. The Pope quickly racked up 1.5 million followers. He already has more than 26 million followers on Twitter. And lest anyone forget, the Will Wilder book tour rolls on. I have to tell you, in the midst of all this depressing news from Europe and the presidential follies at home, it's been such a gift for me to spend time sharing this story and just talking to kids. I have visited with hundreds of them over the past week in the Chicago area, in Milwaukee. To see hope and wonder in these young eyes is so refreshing. I'll tell you, it lifted my spirits. And to learn that some of them have already read the book was just a thrill. My next stop is Cleveland. I'll be in Woodmere, Ohio on Monday, March 28th, Easter Monday, at the Barnes & Noble on Chagrin Avenue at 6 p.m. Come out, bring your friends and your kids, and get your copy of Will Wilder, The Relic of Perilous Falls, the first in this great middle grade series. It is a wonderful Easter gift for kids, and I'll even sign it for you. Can't wait to see you all there. Go to RaymondArroyo.com for all the event details, and you can get your copy now at the EWTN Religious Catalog, Amazon, Books A Million, Barnes & Noble, wherever books are sold. When we return, Congressman Chris Smith and Dr. WALID PHARES join me to discuss the Brussels terror attacks, Cuba, and the West's fight with ISIS, and much more. The World Over Live continues in a moment. Stay right there.
We will do whatever is necessary to support our friend and ally Belgium in bringing to justice those who are responsible And this is yet another reminder that the world must unite. We can and we will defeat those who threaten the safety and security of people all around the world.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. That was President Barack Obama in Cuba on Tuesday, responding to the terrorist attacks in Brussels. In the past week, we have seen an historic declaration of genocide against ISIS by the United States Department of State, as well as President Obama's visit to Cuba, as you saw there. To break it all down for us, please welcome senior member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee and human rights advocate, and a familiar face on this show, Congressman Chris Smith of New Jersey.
Raymond, thank you very much,
Congressman. And also joining us, the advisor to the Anti-Terrorism Caucus of the House of Representatives and newly minted member of the Trump Foreign Policy Team, Dr. WALID PHARES. We'll get into all of that later. WALID, great to see you.
Thank you.
I want to begin with what we're seeing play out here. The president said we have to support our allies. How are we supporting them now?
Well, I think the greatest way is through intelligence sharing that's robust, that is real time, and we need to go even further. They're already saying that there were intelligence failures in Brussels, and that's a big open question now. What did they know? When did they know it? And whether or not they were taking corrective actions. You know, the time for being asleep is long over. There are sleeper cells and group cells all over the world, including the United States and Europe.
What do you think, Walid? I mean, we're hearing reports now that ISIS is unleashing 400 fighters. They've been training. They plan to, what the AP calls, unleash a wave of bloodshed in Europe.
These are the ISIS math that are working. I mean, 400 is the estimate for Europe, but what's inside Europe as well? What's inside the United States? The communications between both is established. My concern is that Europeans and ourselves are not doing a good work within the communities. How come these jihadists in Brussels have been hiding for months inside a neighborhood? Well, there are two reasons. Number one, many people from the neighborhood would know are intimidated, are afraid. We need to work with them. And many people in law enforcement are intimidated by their own politicians. So that's why they were not able to go inside at the time that was important.
An emphasis on community policing, so that, as Walid said, the people will feel free and encouraged, enabled to let people know when something doesn't look right.
In their own neighborhood.
In their own neighborhoods.
And what's the answer?
And we need
here?
to destroy ISIS.
Okay, but what's the answer? How do you do that? Do you put boots on the ground, or are you saying we need more troops?
Well, I think what we need to be doing, which we have not done, is to really mobilize people in the area, train them effectively, and increase the bombing raids. I mean, there has been, you compare this to previous bombing raids under the previous administration, and it's very, very small in comparison.
And you're not going to beat them with bombing raids.
No,
you have to. You do have to send troops in to rout them.
Eventually, yes, Raymond. Look, in the areas close to Kurdistan, the Kurds have to move in. In the areas lost by the Yazidi and the Christians, we have to have Yazidi and Christians going back and protecting their own areas, so we need zones. But in those large areas of Sunni, controlled by Daesh, by ISIS, we need to put together an Arab coalition of moderates, Kuwait, UAE, Saudi, Egypt, Jordan, and have them move, and we have the air cover.
I want to play a bite for you. This obviously takes on political ramifications, this Brussels attack. All the presidential candidates are talking about it, offering their own remedy. Here's what Donald Trump had to say just the other day.
The waterboarding would be fine, and if they could expand the laws, I would do a lot more than waterboarding. You have to get the information from these people.
Walid, you're an advisor to the Trump campaign. Your thoughts on this? Is waterboarding what's needed? Some say this crosses a moral line.
That's basically a tactical discussion of an instrument of an interrogation, not the strategy. In other words, he said also it has to be legal. We need to talk with the lawmakers. So this is a discussion that has to take place inside Congress and then have a consensus about it. What is waterboarding? What is torture? Torture is illegal. So that's why he said, well, let Congress discuss this issue, and we'll work with them.
Yeah. Congressman Smith, when you hear this, when you see Donald Trump saying we need to tighten up the border, we need to know who's coming in here, and maybe we should have a cease and desist for the moment of letting anyone from the Middle East into the country. A good idea, a bad idea? Your thoughts?
Well, I think we need a better way of ensuring vetting those people who do come here. To say that all Muslims cannot come here, I mean, there are American Muslims who might be on their way back to their homes here in the United States. There are Muslims in the United States military who are serving with great distinction and honor and courage. They should be allowed back. Obviously, it's a no-brainer. But I think our vetting process must be beefed up. Our border on the southern part of the United States is so porous that people are pouring over that border, and obviously integrated in that mass immigration could be a number of ISIS fighters and terrorists.
I want to play another bite for you. This is on Wednesday. Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton highlighted the severity of the threat of ISIS, and she slammed her GOP rivals. Listen to this.
Putin already hopes to divide Europe. If Mr. Trump gets his way, it'll be like Christmas in the Kremlin. In our fight against radical jihadism, we have to do what actually works. One thing we know that does not work is offensive, inflammatory rhetoric that demonizes all Muslims. So when Republican candidates like Ted Cruz call for treating American Muslims like criminals and for racially profiling predominantly Muslim neighborhoods, it's wrong, it's counterproductive, it's dangerous.
Is she right?
I think she has gone too far. I think she's engaging in political speech in order to try to curry favor, to create caricatures, straw man arguments against Republican candidates. We have not done a good job under the Obama administration in determining who's coming across our borders. We have not sealed the border. The president, through his executive order, has made it, like I said a moment ago, far more porous, which means that people can come and go, and it's usually coming at liberty without any fear of deportation. And when it comes to overseas, you know, let's not forget, this is the Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, who is in charge of Libya. And Libya is an unmitigated disaster for this former Secretary of State, not just the terrible loss of 4 Americans, including our ambassador, but the miscues, the mistakes that were compounded. I wrote the Embassy Security Act that after Dar es Salaam and Nairobi were hit by al-Qaeda, we increased the number of diplomatic security personnel that were deployable all around the world. One of the defaults that they went to at the State Department, including the Secretary of State, was to say, we don't have enough diplomatic security people to deploy. Time out. And I called her out immediately and said, I'm the one who wrote that law. The appropriators provided the money. I wrote the policy enhancement. Those people were there. You just chose not to send them where they were needed most, and Libya is where they were needed most.
WALID, we are hearing now reports. There's a new report published by the Program on Extremism at George Washington University. They claim there are 900 active investigations against ISIS sympathizers in all 50 states. How present a danger is this now? Do you expect we are going to see a Brussels somewhere in the United States?
It will have to happen. I mean, if we are investigating in all 50 states conspiracies or activities by jihadists, what do you think the jihadists want to do when they can? Is to pull another Chattanooga, another Boston, another California. The problem, as the congressman has said it very well, has 2 words. One is vetting. And for vetting, you need to have partners. You need to have within the communities. These are the best vetters. So what did the administration do? What did Madam Clinton do when she was Secretary of State? She did not collaborate. She did not work with the seculars and moderates. She was partnering with the Muslim Brotherhood. Ask the Egyptians.
But are there seculars and moderates left now in the wake of the ISIS purge in these lands?
Well, in Egypt and Tunisia, look, this is a reverse process. In Tunisia, women, minorities, students, they pushed back against al-Nahda. They pushed back. They were able to do it on their own, not even with our help. In Egypt, when they did it, what did the administration call them? A coup. I mean, this is a coup by 30 million people rising, of civil society rising against the Brotherhood. So the mistakes of the past that the administration has committed are the ones to be reversed, are the policies that we need to reverse. We need to partner with the secular women, minorities, and moderates.
Let's not forget,
before I leave this, go ahead.
Look at the agreement with Iran. It is the most flawed agreement I have ever seen. It makes the procurement of nuclear weapons by Iran a near certainty.
It facilitates it.
It facilitates it in a robust way and gives them at least $100 billion that will buy weapons from Russia, that will pour into Hezbollah and other terrorist organizations, including Assad's killing fields. So what were they thinking? And then we didn't even get a vote in the House or certainly in the Senate pursuant to the provisions that the president signed. This will come back to haunt us like nothing else in modern times.
No, these foreign policy considerations that we've sort of let simmer on, you know, and look askance at, it's coming home.
It is.
It's coming home to roost, and it's something we certainly have to worry about. I want to play something for you. I know you have been involved, Congressman Smith, and I know you, WALID, have been focused on this as well, hoping that the United States Department of State would declare ISIS's actions in the Middle East as a genocide. This is Secretary Kerry, who did just that last week. I want to talk about the implications. Roll that.
We know that Daesh has given some of its victims a choice between abandoning their faith or being killed. And that, for many, is a choice between one kind of death and another. The fact is that Daesh kills Christians because they are Christians.
You and others have been calling for this recognition for a long time. What does it really mean?
Well, I've been calling it for years. I've chaired 5 hearings, and the latest was on December 9th. The first was in 2013, saying that this rises to the definition of genocide, trying to destroy a religious group in whole or in part, and the systematic destruction of churches and especially women and children and men who refuse to capitulate on their faith. Is the textbook example. Why they were so long is beguiling, but finally, at long last, they have made such a statement. Now we need to implement. What's next? I think there needs to be a war crimes tribunal. The Genocide Convention in Article 6 and elsewhere in the convention makes very clear that people who commit genocide need to be punished. I believe that a regional war crimes tribunal, like we had in Yugoslavia, Sierra Leone, and Rwanda, is the only viable means to hold these people to account. The International Criminal Court has had 2 convictions in 14 years.
Wow.
The regional courts have well over 100 convictions and are much more flexible, aggressive, and
they know the situation,
and will hold
right.
all parties to account.
WALID, we keep hearing, I hear from people who've advocated, we're urging this genocide declaration for years. They say, well, this is very nice, but the administration is already sort of backing away from it, saying, look, this doesn't mean we're committing ourselves to any real action. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Your thoughts?
Because the administration is under 2 pressures, one coming from Iran and one coming from the Muslim Brotherhood and their allies in the region. Because as the congressman has said, if you want to implement it, it means protection. And protection means autonomous areas for the Assyrians, for the Yazidis, for the Syriacs, for others. And these autonomous areas are going to block what? The Iranian project in the region, the Muslim Brotherhood project in the region. So all is connected to these mistakes in foreign policy.
Let's talk about the dramatic event we saw, the other one that really was overshadowed by Brussels and everything else happening this week. President Obama, the first president in 88 years to visit Cuba with no conditions at all. And some human rights advocates were yowling. My email box was filled with people, some who regularly visit the island, very concerned that the president basically gave the honor of the office, brought the honor of the United States, and elevated Raul Castro with nothing in return. Valid criticism?
Absolutely valid criticism. The president has been all give, all selfies, and no substantive human rights efforts. I'll give an example. Several people were arrested, beaten. Women in white were arrested. Before he came, he should have said, because you did that, I'm not coming. Raul Castro said, oh, give me the names of the political prisoners. The president should have taken out, or somebody should have handed him, the list of political prisoners.
You have them.
I began a hearing yesterday on human trafficking, and again, there's another case where we've capitulated. In order to curry favor with the Castro regime, Obama took Cuba off the sanctions list as it relates to human trafficking. They have a horrific problem.
And terrorism. They were on the terrorism list as well.
But they have a horrific problem with sex and labor trafficking. It's government complicity. I had a hearing yesterday on it. The witness couldn't have been more replete with examples of how they make money by creating victims and by enabling this modern day slavery. And yet the president took them off that list for non-human trafficking criteria. That is to say, oh, let's just make nice. Human rights are all about being strong for the victim. And the victims in Cuba are suffering in the gulags, and they're suffering in the hotels where they're being trafficked.
WALID, PHARES, if you talk to some folks, they say, we've tried this isolationist approach for years. We blocked Cuba. There's an embargo in place. It's now time for dialogue. The warriors that were in the Cold War, that's behind us. This is a new era. You would say what?
I would say dialogue in the time of dialogue. President Reagan to Gorbachev, tear down that wall. What did Gorbachev do? He started perestroika and glasnost and reform and releasing prisoners and releasing Jews. That brought down the Soviet Union. What we did right now, what the president has done right now, he is unleashing money to the regime, and the regime has no intention in disseminating that money to the Cuban people, but just to the regime.
Let me add to that. The Washington Post has run a number of very incisive editorials. One of those editorials said, don't give the Castro brothers a lifeline. The Russian government used to aid and abet them. They're gone. The Venezuelan government, another dictatorship, they're gone. In comes the Obama administration opening up money to keep this dictatorship, and it is a dictatorship, with bully boys, secret police, and gulags, and of course the complicity in human trafficking and a host of other human rights abuses. And we're providing them the means to stay in office and to continue their nefarious ways.
The president would probably say this to you, which he said in Cuba. Roll that.
I have come here to bury the last remnant of the Cold War in the Americas. As President of the United States, I've called on our Congress to lift the embargo. It is an outdated burden on the Cuban people. It's a burden on the Americans who want to work and do business or invest here in Cuba. It's time to lift the embargo.
WALID, PHARES, should the embargo be lifted?
Yes, when the regime in Cuba will open the doors of the jails. You open those gates and let people have freedom, and then we'll...
Because these are political prisoners.
That's right.
Of course.
And
their own citizens.
Raymond, there's been more political prisoners since this rapprochement by Barack Obama began. The numbers have gone up, and they arrest, they beat, they harass, and then Obama is claiming what? He has nothing to show for this but more trade. But what does that trade do? It strengthens a dictatorship. We tried this with Vietnam under Clinton, and Vietnam became stronger economically and stronger as a dictatorship. And to say we're going to bury the Cold War, you know, that's a straw man argument. This is about human rights abuse in current day. It's happening right now, and there are real victims, women, children. Child sex tourism in Cuba is a huge problem, and it's facilitated by the government, and the profits go to the government of Cuba.
Yeah, people all, I mean, everybody I talk to, you know, they're looking at beaches, casinos, and the, you know, mojitos on the sand. That is not what Cuba is. If you go there, these are families separated. Their babies trained in these camps, so they are indoctrinated with the Castro philosophy. This is not a place. This is not a happy place. This isn't Key West. And I think some people have kind of a romantic
Just like they do
view
about
of
Che
this.
Guevara, a mass murderer.
Yeah.
You know, and interesting, the
He
president was
looks great
standing.
on the T-shirt, doesn't he?
Yeah, it does. It's terrible. And,
Where does this go from here? What are the implications? What's the message to the global community when they see the United States is willing to do a deal in the hopes that trade will bring freedom?
It is going to encourage other dictatorships. Don't you think that the president is thinking about going to Tehran? To go to Tehran and repeat what has happened in Cuba? Or to other capitals under, you know, dictatorships? That's the concern.
and you know, you look who bands together. It's Iran, Cuba, the People's Republic of China. Xi Jinping, the president of China, will be here next week.
And they're a big investor in Cuba.
And a very big investor, but they are in a race to the bottom with North Korea when it comes to human rights. I was just in Shanghai and gave a speech on human rights at Shanghai NYU and pointed out that on religious freedom, Xi Jinping is calling it the signification of religion, where it's already greatly curtailed and people are in prison. I've met many of the bishops who have spent time in the gulags. They call it the Laogai in China. The house church movement, all the different expression of religion. He wants to make it, he being the president of China, so that they are even further crushed. There's like a new effort being made right now. He's coming to see the president. Do you expect the president to raise human rights? He never has done so in any kind of public way, and things have gotten worse in China on his watch.
Before I let you all go, Walid PHARES, final question. We hear that there are these cells, just to get back to the Brussels attack. This is the most present danger we certainly face today. We hear these cells are already in place here in the United States. Many of these people, like the Tsarnaev brothers, the Boston bombing, they're probably citizens. How do we go about discovering among our own citizens these cells? Is there a way? Are we missing something? And is the TSA and the monitoring that we have now, the surveillance now, is it sufficient?
You're not going to detect them at the gate of an airport or a ticket counter. You're going to have to work, as the congressman has said, on vetting, strategic vetting. And that would be either
Racial
overseas.
profiling?
You don't need racial profiling. When you go to Israel and you are, spoken to at the airport, do they ask about your race? Do they tell you what is the color of your skin? No. They are intelligent. They ask questions about ideology. They ask questions about history, questions about strategy, and then you can get what you want in terms of information. The problem is that we need a vetting, first of all, in the region. And one first answer to the issue of migration, because people have been talking about the migrants. Well, before they leave Syria, there is a solution in Syria. There's a whole free area in Syria, the northeastern part of Syria. Direct the refugees there first. Why are we not doing this?
And secure that area.
Secure that area. It has airports, it has hotels, it has Wi-Fi in some places. So why do we have to struggle in Europe and here? And I spoke to those refugees when I was in the region. I asked a young girl, what do you really want to, where to go? And she said, home. I want to go home. And women and mothers. So we don't have a policy in Syria, and therefore we end up with a large group of refugees that can be solved.
I met with a group of Chaldean Christians over the weekend, spoke to a large group in Arizona. And I can tell you, as Walid said, they do want to go home. But for those who can't, one of the things that this designation of genocide ought to encourage and really mandate is that these individual Christians,
get priority.
like Yazidis, get priority.
Yes.
And Obama said, and I think this was a horrible thing to say, that he doesn't want a religious test. Well, if it can help facilitate some people who are the victims of genocide to find a safe haven, a place where their children, husbands and wives can live without being decimated and annihilated, we need to embrace that.
Yeah, very good. Walid PHARES, Congressman Chris Smith, thank you both for being here. We will check in again with you in the days ahead, I'm sure, and happy Easter. Walid PHARES' latest book, The Lost Spring, U.S. Policy in the Middle East and Catastrophes to Avoid, is still available at bookstores everywhere and online. When we return, presidential primaries and caucuses continued this week, with Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton still in their respective leads. Fox News contributor Mercedes SCHLAPP is here. She'll discuss it all. The World Over continues in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over. The 2016 race for the presidency continued this week. Donald Trump won big in Arizona, and Ted Cruz took Utah for the GOP. Meanwhile, Hillary Clinton won in Arizona, and Bernie Sanders took Idaho and Utah in the Democratic column. As Trump extends his lead in the GOP delegate count, talk of a third party, brokered convention, and much more continues. We're joined by Fox News contributor Mercedes SCHLAPP to help us make sense of this wild ride. Mercy, thank you for being here. So what do you make of this? I'm going to play this bite from Ted Cruz. He looks at the math and he says it's time for Kasich to get out. It should be mano a mano, just me and Donald Trump. Listen to this.
Here's the dynamic that's going to happen. Kasich is going to lose in Utah tonight. He's going to lose in Arizona.
Right.
In 2 weeks, he's going to lose in Wisconsin. He went 0 for 27. He won his home state. But at this point, what he's doing doesn't make any sense unless he's auditioning to be Trump's vice president, because he can only be a spoiler.
Does he have a point? I mean, Kasich only won one state so far.
Absolutely. Cruz has, of course, Kasich should be out of this race. Winning Ohio doesn't justify enough to stay in the race. But I think that Kasich is hoping to do well in states like Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland, Delaware. But here's the deal. Second place is just not enough. He's not going to be able, Kasich is not going to be able to get the delegates he needs to really compete at the level that we're seeing Cruz and Trump going mano a mano, as you say.
There was a Quinnipiac general election poll out Wednesday that pitted these three candidates against Hillary Clinton. John Kasich is the only one who beats her.
And that's
so is that the rationale for him staying in?
Absolutely. And Kasich mentioned it today. He said, look, I am the most electable. I can beat Hillary Clinton. I could beat a Bernie Sanders. And he's got a point. But that's not where the GOP electorate is. The GOP electorate, they do not want the experienced governor necessarily or the experienced congressman. They don't want the Washington insider. It's what we're seeing time and time again in each of these different states throughout the country.
That is a great segue to this next point. It's clear Ted Cruz made his bones advertising himself as the anti-establishment candidate, the outsider. He demonized the Washington cartel. Now he's singing a different tune. He's being surrounded by Mitt Romney. He's being surrounded by Jeb Bush, endorsed by Jeb Bush this week. Does that undercut, does that hurt his candidacy in this election cycle?
I think the endorsements definitely do not hurt him. I mean, definitely do hurt him. When you're looking at Ted Cruz, for example, where he was what you would consider the original outsider, fighting against Washington, that's the message that he's taken. But guess what? In the national polls, he's like at 24%. So he's going, well, maybe I should change my strategy to try to unite that anti-Trump vote. And that's where Cruz is focusing his strategy, is saying, okay, everybody who's not in the Trump camp, come over to my side. But I don't think it's really it's not pushing him to where he needs to be.
Yeah, and I think in this election cycle, when you talk to voters, when you listen to them, as I've been doing for the last few weeks on this book tour, and in primary states as it happens, there's a lot of pain. It's not anger, it's pain.
Yes.
And they feel frustrated and brokenhearted. Not only, I mean, when you look at the Catholics and evangelical numbers, it's mind-blowing that Donald Trump is getting 53% of Catholics in Massachusetts, 49% of evangelicals in Florida, in Alabama, in Mississippi. No one can make sense of this. They will tell you, we've had it. We've had it with the politicization of the church. We've had it with leaders that we thought we knew who then turn their backs on us once they get into office. How much of that, will that frustrate Ted Cruz's ambition here?
Well, it's been frustrating Ted Cruz's ambition from the beginning. Remember, Ted Cruz focused on the Southern strategy, which is winning the evangelical votes in those states like Mississippi, like Alabama. He really wasn't able to capitalize that. Why? Trump was able to win the majority of those evangelical votes, frustrating his ability to win. So, and guess what? The map gets tougher for Ted Cruz as we continue to go into Wisconsin. Although with the Governor Walker endorsement, that endorsement can help him. But then you're talking about New York, New Jersey, where you see a lot of these moderate Republicans, California. This, again, is an area where I think Trump will be very strong in those states. But this is not going to be determined, at least not till late June, or we're talking a contested convention.
This is going to be a brawl, ruin our summer. I want to put up some of these tweets that have been flying back and forth between Ted Cruz and Donald Trump. On Tuesday, Trump accused, quote, Lion Ted of being responsible for an ad that put out by an anti-Trump super PAC that shows Trump's wife posing in the nude. And he tweeted out, "Be careful, Lion Ted. I will spill the beans on your wife." Cruz responds, "Pick of your wife, not from us. Donald, if you try to attack Heidi, you're more of a coward than I thought. Classless." On Wednesday, Trump responded. Lion Ted denied that he had anything to do with the GQ model photo post of Melania. That's why we call him Lion Ted. Here's my question. Does the Lion Ted moniker stick in the way that the low energy moniker stuck to Jeb Bush?
And like the little Marco stuck to Marco as well. But here's what I would tell these two candidates. I feel like if they would be my two sons, I would smack them over the head and be like, give me your iPads. You're not allowed to tweet for the next, at least during Holy Week, they're not allowed to tweet.
No tweets during
They've got to stop the madness. Why? Because we have serious issues, Raymond. 36 hours ago, we saw these terrorist attacks in Brussels. What we need to be talking about is national security, the economy, immigration, these issues that are really impacting everyday Americans. So can we not talk about the wives or the children, and let's just lay low on that? It was not a Cruz ad in any way. This is a very aggressive anti-Trump ad, which these guys are known, this super PAC is known for their guerrilla campaigning and tactics. They even said it themselves, they were going to go after Trump that hard. And let's move forward and really talk about the issues.
I don't think it had any effect. I don't think anybody cares. I mean, particularly when, after the Brussels event, it sort of refocuses all of our attention on national security And I was watching the morning shows as the smoke was still clearing. Trump was on every network,
Right.
like he was the president.
Right.
Meanwhile, Barack Obama's in Cuba at the baseball
doing
game.
the wave in the baseball game.
It was,
Are you serious?
Yeah.
And talked about Brussels for 51 seconds. Really, he misses a point on that. I think the president really failed on that.
Then this week, Speaker Paul Ryan jumped into the fray, almost as a little referee. And well, I'll play this bite for you. He is upset about the tone and the tenor of the exchange between the candidates. Watch.
Our political discourse, both the kind that we see on TV and the kind that we experience among each other, it did not used to be this bad. All of us as leaders can hold ourselves to the highest standards of integrity and decency. Instead of playing to your anxieties, we can appeal to your aspirations.
Is this effective? Or does this only solidify the vision in the minds of some of these disaffected voters that Washington is out of touch?
Well, I think for Speaker Ryan, he was talking more so to calm the nerves of the Washington establishment more than anything else.
And
Plus,
they do have the vapors.
Remember, he's chairman. He's chairman of the convention,
Yeah.
so he has a very critical role on how this is all going to be played out. And God only knows that he's going to be very nervous come July. And if neither of these candidates have a majority, how this is going to play out and could affect Speaker Ryan's role. So he's trying to come across being the civil, calm leader, and maybe he has other intentions, although he says he doesn't want to be running for president, but they could be saying maybe he's that voice of reason.
Well, they keep saying there's going to be a contested convention. Gut check, Mercy. Do you believe there will be a contested convention? And is there a possibility that we might see from the floor Mitt Romney and or Paul Ryan drafted?
Well, first, I think it's a little bit like March Madness when you're seeing these college basketball teams put up against each other. And when you start looking at the states that are left, I think it will be very difficult for Donald Trump to reach that majority. I think he could be short, even in a best case scenario, with about 200 delegates short, which means, but when you look at one of the latest polls, they said that 59% of GOP voters said, look, if he gets close to the majority, let him have the nominee.
Right.
However, I don't think that's going to be the sentiment of
in the convention
and from the party leaders. They're going to say, like, look, these are our rules, and we're going to have to play by the rules. If that is the case, and then you have Ted Cruz neck and neck with Trump, we are going to end up in a contested convention, and it gets very complicated from there.
National Review wrote a very interesting piece. They say that a contested convention would actually benefit Ted Cruz because he's being enveloped now by the establishment, and they will use their control over the delegates after the first ballot. They'll be all released, and that the RNC can exert its influence and push Cruz in. Do you think that's viable?
There's two games that are occurring right now. We see the primary campaign happening, as evolving, as we're saying.
Yep.
But then there's this other campaign going on. It's called the delegate campaign.
Yeah.
It's a shadow
campaign.
And so Trump's campaign, Cruz's campaign, Case's campaign, they are courting the delegates. They want to reach out to them. And that is why we think that Jeb Bush's endorsement doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter in the primary election, but it could matter in the convention election.
I see. No, before I let you go here, if at that convention we see this kind of influence happening on the floor, the establishment leaning on these delegates, they start to vote in a Kasich or a Romney from the wings.
Right.
Don't you think this mass of voters
Yes.
that are so angry
Yes.
only get angrier?
Yes.
And then that encourages a third party run by a guy like Trump or Bernie Sanders, which might happen on the Democratic side.
Right.
We don't know. Probably not, but it could. Doesn't that just roil the waters and guarantee a Hillary Clinton
This is why it's so unsettling right now, because when you look at it in the first ballot, the delegates are bound to their candidate. However, in that second ballot, 2/3 of the candidates, of the delegates become free agents. That is when it gets complicated in that second ballot. And if they do not have a majority, Raymond, it is going to be a lot of arm twisting. Could benefit a Cruz over a Trump. And if that's the case and they take away that Trump nomination, what you'll see is a lot of those Trump supporters coming out and saying, I'll tell you right now, we're not voting, we're not supporting
We're
Ted
sitting
Cruz.
it out.
Exactly. And handing over the election to Hillary Clinton. But some people would argue that Trump winning the nomination is handing over the election to Hillary Clinton. So this is what I would call an incredibly messy process.
Yeah, no, the whole thing is a mess. And with these international events, that's all impinging on this battle as well, and will no doubt shape it in the days to come. So.
And as I say your rosary, pray a lot for the future of our country. It's going to be incredibly important this next election.
And the safety of the delegates in Cleveland.
That is right.
Mercy SCHLAPP, thank you so much for being here. We will be in touch in the days ahead. That is all the time we have until next week. The show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter. The links are at RaymondArroyo.com. Don't miss the show next week. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, have a wonderful Easter, and we'll see you when it's over. I'm Raymond Arroyo from Washington, D.C. Bye now.